If you work for the Catholic Church and want to avoid burnout, overcome team dysfunctions, and put more souls in the pews, we're here to help. I'm Ty Hua, here with my co-host John Cons, and this is Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast. This show provides leadership development for Catholic churches. Every week, you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today, we're having a conversation with a real, live Catholic ministry professional. Brian Stai, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Say Brian and I have some crossover in our lives here. We both have worked at O'Gorman High School. We'll give you a chance to kind of tell people about the ministry you do there. And I don't want to take full credit for all of your success, but you are standing on my shoulders. So you're welcome. And thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's good to be here. Yeah, John was also at O'Gorman. You were a custodian, right? For 17 years. Is that what you were doing?
It often felt like that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. John was, I'm Brian Stai. I'm the campus minister, or coordinator of Campus Ministries, as I think it's evolved to. And this is my 5th year in this role. And John, you were here 7 or 8 years, you said?
7 years. 7 years.
7 years. Yep.
You're
and then
about
Nicole
to outlive
Wellington.
me.
Yeah. And then Nicole Wellington was here for a couple of years, and then I've been here the last 5. So,
I will say one of the strangest experiences, because O'Gorman was my first professional job, and I was there for 7 years, and you build all these things and you do all this work, and you get known as, like, I was a fixture there. After 7 years, all the kids knew me, like all the, there were teachers there who thought I'd been there forever because they came after me. And then you leave, and literally like 2 years later, none of the kids remembered who I was. I came walking in one day, and it's like, just nobody knows, nobody cares anymore.
Yeah.
So it is humbling how those things transition. But yeah, let's I know who you are. Ty knows who you are a little bit, but yeah, just take a little bit of time to tell the listeners about yourself, and let them know just kind of what your ministry looks like.
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in Northwest Iowa, and then attended South Dakota State University, where got really involved in the Newman Center there. And that's kind of where my deepening conversion happened my junior year of college. Got to know some friends, or got to know some people who became friends who really invited me into their faith journey, and their faith life and their ministry through the Newman Center and through Focus, Fellowship of Catholic University Students at South Dakota State. So I got involved in Bible studies, discipleship, all those type of things. Saw a lot of positive changes in my life, and really drew closer to God for the first time, or for one of the first times in my life. And just saw a lot of joy and peace in that. And then as a senior, became a student leader in Focus at the Newman Center, and started leading my own Bible study and mentoring other students, other friends. And just kind of felt a call that it might be cool to do ministry full time as a job after college. And so then I joined Focus for 4 years, 2 years at Northern Colorado, and then 2 years at Eastern Washington, where I was the team director at Eastern Washington, and we brought Focus to Eastern. So I got to be there for the first 2 years of Focus, which was really cool to kind of be able to set the tone and kind of help really create a culture of what you want it to be, and what you feel like it should be, and where God's calling it to be, as far as the Focus ministry. So that was really cool. Then after that, my wife and I stayed out in Washington for a couple more years. I worked for the Diocese of Spokane in young adult ministry and evangelization. And then, 5 years ago, going on 6, we moved back to Sioux Falls to be closer to family. And then I took this job at O'Gorman. So the second part of your question, our ministry, I think, the cool thing that I feel blessed about coming to O'Gorman was, during the interview, I wasn't totally sold on if I was going to take the job or not going into the interview. It was one of a couple options. Some of those were ministry opportunities, and some of those were not ministry opportunities. I have a business degree, economics degree from South Dakota State, and So I was kind of discerning between those things. But the questions that they asked really opened my heart, I think, and opened my eyes to uh, what the administration at O'Gorman was looking for, and it felt like a really good fit. And so when they were asking me questions about specific students that you've discipled, they were asking me questions in the interview. How do you make campus ministry at O'Gorman an authentic experience? How do we get more kids involved? That was all things that I was really excited about. I think certain ministry jobs, as you guys know, you might just be like inheriting a lot and inheriting like a lot of programs. And you personally may or may not be like excited about those things. And every job is going to have parts of the job that you're maybe not the most excited about. But it was kind of told to me like, we really want to revamp campus ministry. And so they kind of told me several times, you have kind of a blank slate of what you want to do. So when I got hired, that's kind of where we started. Was it's a blank slate. We kind of want to invite more students into campus ministry. We want to be more visible within the school system. And that kind of matched up perfectly to my perspective. I didn't go to a Catholic school. But one of my goals, what I felt called to bring to O'Gorman was that I think every student at O'Gorman should feel welcomed and see the possibility of themselves getting involved in campus ministry. Obviously, not every student is going to get involved in campus ministry, and students are going to say no, they're too busy or they're not interested. That's fine. But I didn't want to set the bar or have a culture where they already felt excluded from campus ministry. So I wanted the student to be able to make that decision of, that we have depth in campus ministry of a strong and spirituality and discipleship, but also that it feels authentic and it feels normal for a student to want to get involved. Like that wouldn't be a weird thing of like, oh, you're in campus ministry. Like, wow. Like, but no, like that's a part of O'Gorman's life is that, you're involved in campus ministry as a student at O'Gorman and you feel welcome to that. And you feel like it's something that connects with you as a student. So that's kind of the foundation of a lot of what we started at O'Gorman. And certainly I inherited aspects of the campus ministers before me and the chaplains before me. And Nolan Cleary is our department chair, and he's a theology teacher at O'Gorman. And he had in the spring, they'd kind of experimented with doing an optional retreat. So John, as you remember, O'Gorman used to do, like a lot of Catholic schools, kind of a mandatory one-day retreat where each grade would have a retreat that they would go to. And it was kind of one of those things that before I was hired, it was talked through with the theology staff and administration of, is this the direction we want to go into? Or are we okay letting our numbers dip a little bit, but have students choose to come to things with a little more buy-in? And so they opted to go to the optional route. And so in the spring before I came, Nolan Cleary and the theology staff and the chaplain at the time did an optional retreat. And it was received really well. A lot of students really felt like it was very fruitful, and they saw the impact of like, okay, I'm here with 30 or 40 of students that want to be here and not kind of like during the school day mandatory type situation. And it was really fruitful. So going into the summer when I was hired, Nolan kind of brought that up of, hey, we have a group of students really involved in campus ministry. Like they like these optional opportunities. They also like praise and worship. What would you think about us trying to do like an optional praise and worship night once a month, a couple times a semester? He's like, do you have a background in that? Do you have any interest in that? And I was like, well, it just so happens that at South Dakota State, I was a part of a ministry that was called The Well. So I did not create the name. And we may have borrowed that name from a non-denominational ministry or a poster we saw on campus one time. We're like, that's a cool name for an event. What if we call it The Well?
This is ours now.
And since then, obviously, we've made it our own and stuff. But yeah, South Dakota State, the Focus team, Glenn Gower, Father Andrew, and the Focus missionaries and the student leaders had an event called The Well through the Newman Center. And it was once a month. It was praise and worship, adoration. We had prayer ministry. confessions, and then afterwards was kind of just like snacks, games, and hanging out. And I saw that. I just saw how fruitful that was for me and a lot of my friends. It was an event that we felt we could invite people to. And so praise and worship for me has been a big part of my ministry, whether in focus or out of focus. I like leading worship. I personally connect with that type of prayer and spirituality. I've seen, dozens and dozens of young people have an encounter with God through, whether it's somebody else leading or myself leading, but through praise and worship specifically. So that's just kind of one of the things in my toolbox that's kind of like a foundational thing for me personally. And so,
Yeah, and I kind of want to dig into that well a little bit too, because we've heard about the well from Father Scott Trainer, and I've also, being from Sioux Falls, there were times where I got to go and help lead worship there. But yeah, what was, I guess, for you, as far as like that vision? You talked a little bit about how that vision was. These are kind of my skill set. These are some of the tools I have in my belt. A little bit of the vision for you is like trying to get the students involved, and how can I make them feel involved? And in my mind, that is one of those gifts of Catholic schools, right? Is that you have all the students are there every day, right? So you have this really unchallenged opportunity to be able to just be present to their lives and where they are. You also, though, you also kind of mentioned that tension of so much of what they experience in the faith is kind of, they have to do it. They feel like they have to do these things. They have these mandatory retreats. They have mandatory mass attendance. They have, all these pieces that are built into it. And so some of your goal has been to create a culture where they can actually opt into it. So I guess, as we're talking about the well, and that is one of the things we want to pull apart. What do you think it is about the well itself specifically? Because again, we're hearing about it from other people. I kept hearing about it. Like, how many students do you get showing up to that, would you say, regularly?
So I would say typically our numbers are in that 80 to 100 range. I
And
think
these are all the kids choosing to come.
Yep, this would be
Yeah.
on a Friday. We do it once a month, on a Friday or Saturday night. We kind of just look at the monthly school event calendar, and obviously choose a night that's not a football game or not a band concert. There's always something going on, but you try to choose something with the least amount of things on the calendar. And so, it's at one of the parishes in Sioux Falls. They graciously will kind of like host us, and yeah, we've just been blown away. Like I mentioned before, at the beginning, Nolan Cleary kind of said, "Is this something you'd be interested in?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's try it." And so I was here. I think the first one we did was September 12th or 13th, Friday, probably a Saturday night because it was football season. And I'd been to the school like a month, and I'm in the hallway and meeting students. And I'm the new guy, and I'm trying to I have a lot of this just kind of excitement to be here and energy, and feeling like the Lord wants to reach out, to students and through me, and kind of to build off what was already going on in O'Gorman. And so we kind of told some students, we kind of had that group of student leaders, from the previous year, and some students that had gone on the retreat that I had mentioned in the spring. And so we had a base of students that were interested, but then we're kind of telling students we're doing this new thing. It's called the Well. It's going to be awesome. And they're like, "What is it?" And we're like, "Well, we think we're going to do some praise and worship, and we think we're going to, we're going to have some snacks afterwards." And I mentioned Nolan Cleary. His background is in, I would say, praise and worship type ministry, prayer ministry. That's kind of his background too. And so anyway, we were hoping for we had a conversation. I'm like, man, if we get 30 students, that'd be pretty sweet. If we got 40 students coming to this optional thing that we've never done before, that would be crazy on a Saturday night. High schoolers, they have things going on, they want to hang out with their friends. And then that very first one, we had 120 show up, and we couldn't believe it. And it wasn't, it wasn't just that so many kids came because they thought we were so cool or something. I'm sure 4 of them thought we were cool. 5, I don't know, 6, I'll take that. But, it was truly, I think, like a work of the Holy Spirit, because I think a lot of it, well, let me say this about the night, and then I'll go back to why I think that is. A lot of students during the worship, we kind of do, I'm not sure what you'd call it. It's a little different than how I've seen praise and worship done in other settings in the Catholic Church. But, I'm leading worship a lot, and Nolan, Cleary, and sometimes other adult leaders, but we'll kind of lead like a little prayer reflection, like in between songs. Maybe it's a gospel reflection, or maybe it's kind of what we feel the students are particularly needing that night, where we feel the Holy Spirit might be leading us. But it might be a 30-second to 2-3 minute maybe reflection about an aspect of God's love, or an aspect of a scripture passage that we feel might be speaking to the students. And so that very first night, I had many students, not all of them, but a handful of students, both to myself and Mr. Cleary, and to Father Schulten, Mrs. Lorette, the other staff, kind of articulate something along the lines of, we've been in Catholic school, and we've learned about God a lot, and we've learned a lot about the faith, but a lot of them felt like they articulated something along the lines of, we've learned about God, but we've never experienced God's love before. Or we've never felt God, felt God's presence, felt his peace. And that whole first year, that was a recurring theme that we heard a lot, that I think was just so powerful. Like you said, the benefit of a Catholic school, right? Obviously learning about God is very important, right? We need to have a theological understanding. Absolutely. And a foundation, but then to pair that with the spiritual experiences, I think is really important. And so I think a lot of what we do in the Well is we kind of act as disciplers, mentors, guides. We're kind of guiding them through this process of what is the spirituality of praise and worship? How do we get our eyes off of ourselves, get our eyes out of our phones, put our eyes upon God. And then as we do that, we're kind of unpacking, okay, who is God? What is God's love? What is his love for us like? How are we children of God? How do we understand that he wants to provide for us? He wants to protect us. He has a plan for our lives. These kind of, I think we're using the kerygma a lot, I think, in our ministry of okay, let's get back to the foundational truths of, Jesus died on the cross for us, for our sins, that he loves us unconditionally, that he has a plan for us, that he wants us to be happy and whole and peaceful, and those types of things. So I think the Well is a lot of that. It's a lot of, as a community, what is God doing in the lives of the students, in the lives of us? How can we disciple them, mentor them to that, that next step, whatever that may be? And so that's kind of a lot of I think the spirituality of the Well, I would say, is it's kind of almost like a mini retreat type atmosphere, as far as we have a time for spiritual encounter, and then we have a time for games and snacks and the fellowship afterwards. And you can just see that, in my opinion, the hangout afterwards at the Well, the snacks and the games, usually is just a really joyful experience, and maybe even more joyful than what you see day to day, just throughout the grind of school. It's students are giving up a weekend night to grow in their faith, to encounter God, and making good choices, right? They're teenagers. There's lots of bad choices they probably could be making. And so it's just, it's cool to see them give that time to God, and to see God bless that they're coming to an event like this as well.
So Brian, when you're talking about making these events optional, what I hear is if you build it, they will come. The Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
I've heard of many other ministries trying to do it, but not as successful? Like, how do you make the well so successful that you're getting, like you said, in the first event, it was 120 kids, and now on average, you're seeing 80 to 90 when you were hoping for 30. I think a lot of ministries, I can speak to the Northwest Iowa connection with you because I lived in Northwest Iowa for a number of years. In those parishes, if they got 30 kids, like that is huge. How did you make it so successful? And was it just based off of this idea, like if you build it, they will come?
Um, I think that's like the second half of it. I would say something that was really affirming to me, because as you guys know, if you've done ministry for a long time, it's like there's a lot of different opinions on what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes like things work at one parish that don't work at another, and things work at a school that doesn't work, and things work in Focus that maybe don't work for Net or for whoever. But we were at a meeting with some administration and some pastors, and they were kind of asking like the first year, like, yeah, what makes the well successful? And maybe the conversation was even like, how do we do this at parishes, or whatever the conversation was. And my principal, Joan Mahoney, she said, she's like, I know, I'm sure the students, they love the praise and worship. They like the spike ball afterwards. They like the snacks. But she's like, the thing in her opinion of what makes the well consistently successful, she said, is I see the relationships that campus ministry and the theology staff are trying to make with the students, like day in and day out. And I would say that's like the number one factor is when you look at Focus and the win, build, send model, like that first part of win. When you look at Sherry Waddell's thresholds of conversion, you look at that trust, curiosity, openness, those beginning phases, I would say that's something that I always feel called to, and I think is a gift of mine. And I would say the same for Mr. Cleary, our other theology staff, our current chaplain, Father Tony, is awesome. Father Tony Klein. We don't talk about that all the time, but I think like we're all kind of on the same page of like, the more, that's like the hard work. And I think sometimes, if I might say this, I think sometimes people shy away from that, or maybe they don't know how to do it, or they get frustrated, because we all get frustrated when you're working with young people, whether it's middle school, teenagers, or college, or ministry in general, right? People walk away, people say no, people that were just like shooting for the moon and growing for the faith, they can cut ties and walk away, or hit a slump, or so yeah, I would say the relationships that we build day in and day out in the school building is probably the number one factor of what drives students to the well. I think we create an environment in the theology department, in K-Wing, as we call it, we're in the K-Wing, theology campus ministry. I think we just really try to create an environment that shows the students that they're known, seen, and loved, that there's kind of an openness, right? That they can ask hard questions in the classroom. They can challenge us at times, right? And we can kind of, go down those roads with them, right? Like the old ministry adage is, you go in the door of someone else's life and you bring them through the door of your life, and hopefully the door of your life leads them to Christ and to God and the beauty of the Catholic Church. So I would say, that's kind of the number one thing, I think, is building the relationships day in and day out at the school, being with the students in their difficult moments, right? Something that we talk about a lot that's interesting about a Catholic school, and I'd be curious what you think, John, since you've been in both sides. I've done youth ministry for parishes, right? And you see kids once a week or once every 2 weeks. And you get, over time, you get a good picture of what's going on, but you're not seeing them like interact with a teacher when they're late for class. You're not seeing them like having a horrible day on Tuesday, and then Wednesday they're having the best day of their life, And so it is like, sometimes that's maybe the grind of it, is like you see them 5 days a week at school, right? And 2 of those days are amazing, and 2 of those days are not so good, and 2 are one's in the middle, however that math works out. And so that's something of just that accompaniment of just walking with them day in and day out, helping them navigate the day-to-day life and trying to be a mentor to them, trying to disciple them through that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that reflection, honestly, because we do say a lot. We talk about all the time on the podcast is that there need to be real, authentic relationships, and so there's a need for being strategic, And so many times when people hear being strategic in your relationships, they hear being manipulative, and it's not about being manipulative. It's about being
Right.
intentional. You have to be intentional, and yes, that's one of the gifts I think that Catholic schools offer. One of the things that popped into my mind is the well was being successful. Pastors are asking, how do we do this at our parish? And it's like, well, the flip side of that, and something I ran into it when I was working in Catholic schools, is no, don't try to take this and recreate it to try and redo it, but rather, why don't you guys come here, since your students, your parishioners are here right now? Just take some time to do it and show up and invest in those relationships in that way. And then you don't have to recreate and add something new to your plate. You could just be a part of the fruit and enjoy it and become a part of that rhythm. But I think those authentic relationships are so key. And there's a lot of difference between an event that you put on, like the well, where you're like, we're going to be there, we're really going to pray and discern what should be a part of this, what message they need to hear. We're going to put on the worship, and then we're going to hang out for, an hour. I don't know if you guys do as long as kids want to hang out, we'll hang out, whatever it is. But that in itself, that's a really, really intentional move to say, I have all the time in the world for you. That's a real investment versus an event where a parish says, well, yeah, we need to do more praise and worship. We're going to do praise and worship for 45 minutes to an hour, and then bye. We'll see you guys. We'll just talk to people as they're milling them out before they leave. That's a completely differently structured event that doesn't have that time built in. And I'm guilty of that, right? Is putting on an event, and then I want to go home and see my family. I want to go be with my kids. So yeah, I'm going to hang out for 15 minutes, but I'm going to be packing stuff up while you're trying to talk to me. When I do that, I'm telling you that you are not the most important element right now. Actually, what's more important is my schedule, my timeline. And so really understanding that there is, if you want to build authentic relationships, the biggest piece you need is time and willingness to spend the time. And I think that's huge. And that can get lost and is hard to do when you are in a parish and you only see them once a week. And so I think that's a completely different animal. It needs to be a completely different type of ministry. And if you really want to be intentional, then you need to kind of go where the kids are. So yeah, if you know that they all always go to the coffee shop, maybe you're going to try and do some events at the coffee shop, or you're going to try and do a Bible study there. If you have a Catholic school that has a significant chunk of your parishioners in that Catholic school, find a way to be a part of the rhythm of their lives that way. That those are some simple ways to begin building those relationships. But yeah, those two models are going to look so different. And I agree with you there. And I think we just need to be honest about that. And to me is actually a pretty good transition to what something else I'd like to talk about is, let's say, we have a lot of people who work in parishes. We do also have people who work in Catholic schools, but they might hear about the success of the well. Wow, you get 80 to 90 kids every time on a Friday or a Saturday night when they could be doing literally anything else. That's amazing. I want that. And so they go, I want to create a ministry like this. So do you have some ideas or thoughts, or what are things that someone should consider if they want to build a ministry like this? But even if they don't have necessarily the gift of music, of being able to lead worship with somebody, what would you really encourage or coach them, or really encourage them to think about as they're looking to engage a group, maybe starting a new ministry like this?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of a few things before this podcast, just because I don't, always reflect on our ministry here at O'Gorman in this way, on a Monday morning. And I was the thing that came to me was, are you guys familiar with the spiritual model, relationship, identity, mission?
No, actually.
Okay, so the acronym RIM. I'm not sure where it started. Maybe IPF in Omaha, and then it it got in like the focus, kind of, it was in our focus tool kit. Father Scott Channer talks about it a lot too. But basically, relationship, identity, mission, RIM is the acronym. So it's, in teaching somebody to pray or starting in their faith journey is this idea that, okay, God is your father, you're a son or daughter of God. Unpack that. There's a lot there, right? And then once you kind of understand that, then you kind of move into like, what is your own identity, right? We get our identities from our other relationships. I'm a brother, friend, sister, football player, musician, whatever. So from the relationship, then we move into identity. Okay, I'm a son of God. My identity comes from that first and foremost, and then my other like sub identities, I guess you could call it. And then from that is like your mission. So we talk about that a lot in ministry, because I think sometimes if we get that like backwards, like I'm just going to like rush into ministry and I don't know where my prayer life totally is at. And I don't know, my self-knowledge is really low, right? We've all probably been there. Like things get kind of messy because the cart is before the horse, right? But when you're really, you're really prayed up, and you're living a good, healthy spiritual life, right? Then your ministry flows from that. It's like, oh, this is kind of clicking, right? There's a lot of peace here. So I brought that up because I was thinking about this and I was like, I think from a ministry standpoint, that acronym fits really well as well. Like thinking about, okay, my relationship with the students or with the population I'm ministering to, right? And then from that, it's like, if my relationship with them is first and foremost, letting them ask the difficult questions, getting to know them, taking interest in their interests, then like, what's my identity? So what are my like gifts and talents and strengths, and what excites me, and then like the mission part flows from that. So for instance, like I mentioned before, like praise and worship has been something that has always really connected me with God. It's always been kind of like a foundational aspect of my spirituality. Obviously you need like daily contemplative prayer, Lectio Divina, prayer of scripture, those type of things I do more daily. I don't do praise and worship like every day, but it's something that kind of like, okay, if I'm going to do something, that's like one of my strengths, one of my passions. I've seen God bless that many times. So my point is, I think first and foremost, if you're someone who's like, I would love to have a ministry where students want to come, I think you're talking about first, creating a relationship with the students or with the people, the adults that you minister to. So like you said, time, like getting in front of them, letting them know that you care about them as a person, right? Like I think especially young people today, like they really need to know that you care about them before like they're going to do something for you or they're going to come to your event, or even take what you have to say, right? Like listen to the truths of the Catholic Church or something like that. They're going to want to know that you care about them. I think the first and foremost thing is building a relationship with the people that you're serving has to be like your foundation. So you might not even know what the end goal is, or like, not that you have a goal, but you might not even, I would say like maybe even like let go of what you think the ministry like should be. Cause I think there's a lot of shoulds, right? I'll get back to my point, but for instance, like this is something that we've talked about before, that sometimes people are caught off guard, where it's like, oh, so you do like a praise and worship adoration night. And when we were first starting this, Mr. Cleary and I had a conversation, because I'm sure there's many opinions on this, and some of them probably very heated, because I've had conversations. My experience before this doing praise and worship was almost every time you would do praise and worship, you would do adoration. But one of the things that we kind of found early on with the students was like, the first couple wells that we do, we actually don't expose Jesus in the Eucharist and do Eucharistic adoration. Just because we've found that like, as we're teaching praise and worship for the first time, as we're kind of guiding them spiritually, it's maybe just like there's an openness with them where they don't maybe feel like it's such a formal experience, that they can kind of like relax a little bit and listen to what we're saying. And, maybe our tone is a little more lighthearted on front, making people feel comfortable. And then as we go through the year, we certainly do Eucharistic adoration and we kind of incorporate that. But I think sometimes it's like, okay, if you're going to do an event, like it has to be adoration, and it has to include this thing, and like maybe you have to do the rosary. Like sometimes we have all these like shoulds, like you just have to do it. And I think in your ministry, being able to sit back and pray through, like, okay, what does God want to do? And eventually we want people to appreciate Eucharistic adoration, have that be, a foundational part of their prayer life. But like, how do you get there? How do you meet people where they are? And so that's just like a particular thing that we've kind of prayed through and discerned of like, okay, we see the fruits on the front end of not doing it as much and kind of working into it. And then obviously we see the fruits of having adoration and trying to teach the students also about like silent prayer and contemplative prayer as well. But I think sometimes we as Catholics, we just want to do like all at once, or like you have to do it all at once. And it's just like, this is like, there's a lot of things happening right now. So back to my first part, build a relationship with the students. And then I would say, look at your own gifts and talents, right? Like people sometimes ask about like, well, why praise and worship? And if your thing, like if the thing that excites you the most in your ministry is like the rosary, then like maybe it's a rosary event. Like, I don't know. It might be. I'm not saying like praise and worship is just like the end all be all for all Catholics of all times,
Well, but
if you're
those two, oh, sorry.
No, go
I just
ahead.
think those two elements really balance each other, though, because it's like, yeah, you love the rosary. You also have to consider that the people you're ministering to, you have to know them well enough to know they're not where you are yet. So you have to lead them into that depth. I think those are good checks and balances, honestly, as I'm hearing you explain this. Like, yes, know them, and then take the thing you're passionate about, but don't expect them to be there yet because you know them well enough to know you have to lead them there. To me, that's a really important element of this model.
Yeah, totally. And being able to, I think, explain it in a way and teach in a way that, so if your thing is like the rosary, how do you like explain that to a teenager and explain what's happening in the spirituality of it in a way that they understand? So I also do think there is something like communal about praise and worship that for some reason is like people can kind of enter into that a little more. I'm not sure what the right word is. Like casually at first, maybe like it's not this like overly formal thing that they're like intimidated of. Like I showed up to this liturgical thing and I didn't know when to sit or stand or say, and then it was intimidating. So I I didn't go back. You hear that sometimes. So yeah, I would say like look at your own gifts and through being a focused missionary, it's like I like playing spike ball. I like playing active games and telling jokes and being goofy with the kids. And so I think a lot of it's like you have to play off your own strengths and like where's God leading you? What are you excited about? What's the population that you're serving? Like what do they need? Because I think sometimes people have asked me like, oh, the kids just like love praise and worship. And I'm like, some of them come to campus ministry probably loving praise and worship, but I think like the vast majority is Mr. Cleary, Mrs. Lorette, those of us that probably have praise and worship more as a passion. The other theology staff, we're teaching them, like we're saying, hey, this has been powerful in our lives. We've seen God do this in our lives through this means. We're going to do it right now, and we're going to invite you along to do that with us. And you certainly don't have to. You can kind of just stand there in the pews and take it in, or we're constantly inviting them deeper through our praise and worship.
Yeah, well, and it's the same thing as somebody who's really passionate about reading scripture and stuff. It's one thing to tell them, hey, you got to read your Bible, it's going to change your life. It's another thing to create that moment where you say, okay, now where you really lead them through Alexio and you model it for them. Okay, we're going to read this really slowly one time. This is what I want you to do. And we're just going to sit for a couple minutes. Okay, now I'm going to read it again. And this is what I want you to focus on. It's just this really intentional guiding them so that they can understand that it's okay if you don't experience all of this stuff, but this is how you do it. And these are some good ways to do it. Here's some other things to avoid. Here's some things to pay attention to. Just really breaking open that process for them.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I don't think I can say that enough. Like I'm a pretty outgoing person. And I think like several of our theology staff are. And so on one hand, maybe you could say, oh, it's not fair because that comes natural to you. In some ways that fills your tank. But I don't think I can state enough. Yeah. The building relationships with the students, taking interest in their lives, showing support for them. I've heard people sometimes even say like, I just kind of do theology. I don't do the small talk. That's nice. And I'm kind of like, good for you. And like, you're probably amazing at getting those people who are already teaching an RCIA class or something like that, or theology. But like in the culture that we live in, and we know the statistics of families attending mass less, just a more secular society, right? Like most of the people you're interacting with, I would say the default is not like the worldview of the church or the worldview of Christ. You know what I mean? Like bits and pieces of it they have, So to me, it's just like, yeah, like I would say like you have to engage in their lives. And most of what they're talking about, if you're talking about teenagers or college students or even adults, is like their interests and passions. And you might see that as superficial. But those are the things when you hear someone join the Catholic Church or you hear someone have a profound conversion, that's what you hear. You hear, man, like I was in a tough spot and this person took interest in me, and we started having coffee or we started playing guitar together, and I needed someone to talk to, right? And they were a listening ear. They were like a support for me. I feel like you hear that all the time, right? And sometimes you hear people like, oh, I picked up a Scott Hahn book by myself. And then like you hear that for sure. But like eventually, whether you intellectually come to the faith or through another person, I think like eventually you're going to need a mentor and a discipler and a guide to like walk with you. So yeah, I think if you're in a parish, I think it's just figuring out, yeah, how do I really love on the people that I'm called to serve? How do I take interest in them, make them feel comfortable? One of the things that was kind of funny my first year at O'Gorman is I was thinking, like, how am I going to meet these kids? Because like they're in class. I'm not going to like pop into class. That's kind of like a weird for me, and not a great time to get to know them. So I think in the past, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, John, in the past, I think events over lunch in campus ministry were like a little more like formative, like structured, like, okay, we have a Bible study happening, or we have like a speaker coming in. And I kind of told our administration, I was like, because they kind of said that, okay, if they're coming in, they have to sign in. There's this whole protocol, so we know they're, where they're supposed to be, which is important. But then they're like, what are they going to be doing in there? And I was like, honestly, like, I don't really want to do anything formative for like a while. Like, I just want to get to know them, like have lunch with them, invite new kids in that previously like wouldn't think of themselves as like a camp min kid or a youth group kid. And they were kind of like, okay, like you're going to have unstructured time over lunch. They're kind of like, I don't know about that. Like, what are they going to be doing? And so I kind of like won them over to the idea of like, I like need to do this. And so we don't do that as much anymore just because our small group program has kind of taken off. But yeah, there would be 30 to 30 kids, almost 40 sometimes, just jam packed in my room eating lunch. And Father John Rutten one time after Wednesday Mass came in, and I just remember we had this awesome conversation because he was just like blown away, and he was like, we weren't doing anything. There wasn't a teaching going on. There wasn't a Bible. So he was just like, this is awesome. He's like, this is just like the culture. He's like, I can just like sense it. Like there's an openness here. And, he knew that there's kids in the room that maybe are never going to come to the well. But to me, it's like, at least there's a chance, if I'm in front of them, if our student leaders are in front of them, if the other theology staff and the chaplain, like if we have time with them and we can invite them in a non-intimidating way, at least there's a chance they could come to the well, they could come to the retreat, they could come to a small group. But I think sometimes like maybe my little advice for people ministries, like if every event's like pretty formative and, people can be intimidated, you need those events, but people can be intimidated to show up to something like that, especially if they're on the front end of a conversion early on. So I think it's just balancing, like in focus lingo, like the win, the build, the send, like having events where anyone feels comfortable coming is very important, right? And then you have your next tier of events where it's like, okay, we're going to give you like a little bit of substance here, a little formation. And then certainly you have like that next level, which is probably like your leadership team, where you're really pouring into them and discipling them and holding them accountable to some degree of, okay, like, this is a little more legitimate, like you're committing to this. But I think sometimes people in the church, we like blend that like either too soon or like kind of like right away, like someone came to 2 things and it's like, okay, like you came to 2 things. Now you have to teach like RE. So yeah, I think that's my unsolicited advice, I guess, is just, continue to build relationships and win the students, win the people that you're taking care of and serving. And then, have events where people feel welcome to come and excited to come. And then you can build from there, I think.
And I think there's a real value to it. You had mentioned it, and I do want to touch on this briefly because I think this plays in a lot of ways. The idea that some people feel like, well, I'm not outgoing, so that's not really my thing. And I have 2 things to say that. One is I don't think there's anything wrong with like an Aaron Moses model, where if you realize like I'm garbage in front of people, that's fine, but make it an intentional effort to find someone who is good in front of people, that understands the mission and is on fire. Because one, that person, like if you can find that platform, that avenue for them to like share the word of God, it's going to light them on fire, and that's going to be effective. And that's okay, because then it leaves you maybe free to do some of those other parts that God really has uniquely gifted you for. I think that's number one. Yeah, if you're not outgoing, I understand. Maybe there is someone in your parish, and intentionally praying for God to bring you someone, and just to make it painfully obvious, like this person would be a good fit in your ministry. I think that's okay to do. I think it's really healthy to do. And it's something that like our pastors aren't free to do. If you're painfully shy as a pastor, you still have to give the homily unless you've got a deacon or someone that can do it.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
That sucks for you. But for us lay people, like if you're not good in front of a large group, find someone else that is, or find another way to do your ministry so that it doesn't have to be. The other side is you're also being paid to do this job. And sometimes you just need to learn the skills that are necessary for you to do that job. And so like, yeah, maybe you're not great at small talk. Read a book on how to be good at small talk, or Google some tips, and it's really simple. It is simple. Small talk is all about being more interested in the other person than you are in what's going on inside yourself. And that's the simple key, is like be more interested in that person than you are in yourself. And I think that's helpful. Well, but anyway, those are my 2 cents kind of following from that. I think it's great advice. I think you brought up some really good points there for whether you're in a Catholic school and you're in a parish. And so, Brian, this has been a great conversation. And I just want to, is there anywhere that our listeners can go to connect with you or to support your ministry?
That's a great question. I have the Bishop O'Gorman OG Knights email. If anyone has any follow-up questions and they want to email me, feel free. It's B for Brian, and then my last name Stai, STAI, at ogknights.org, OGKNIGHTS.org. School email, you can look it up on the O'Gorman High School website. And then we do have an Instagram where we kind of post what's going on in campus ministry. I believe it's just OG Campus Min. So if you search O'Gorman Campus Ministry, it should be one of the few ones that pop up. So yeah, those are kind of the 2 main places, unless there's something I'm forgetting about. But I appreciate you having me on. It's been fun to talk to you guys, and I think sharing ideas with other people in ministry is always a great idea. I think we can learn from each other and challenge each other and grow. And so I appreciate you guys doing the podcast, and I think it's a great thing for people to listen to and learn from, and to feel encouraged by other people who are day in and day out, trying to serve God's people and trying to evangelize. So, Brian, so thank you guys.
You bet, Brian. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
And thank you, dear listeners, for being on the Catholic Ministry Professionals podcast. If you want to transform your parish through your work, but you're not sure where to start, you can download our free parish health assessment at catholicministryprofessionals.com/free free assessment. It's just 36 questions. It only takes about 5 minutes to fill out, and afterwards you will have a color-coded picture of your parish's health that you can then use to fuel better conversations, prioritize better work, and become a better leader. And of course, you can always email us at catholicminpros@gmail.com to share feedback. And finally, don't forget to text this episode to a priest or a friend in ministry that could benefit from it.
With that, we'll see you in the vineyard.